Welcome in. Thank you all so much for coming to Wonderland Books. We opened in mid-December, and I was thrilled when Marina came into the store and told me about her book that was coming out. And you know, we both had the Washington Post connection, and then I said, well, I did parenting for 10 years, and so yeah, I'm thrilled to be here, and I love this book. I loved reading it. I wish I had had it when my now 17 and 15-year-olds were new. So I am so excited for everybody to read this book. The title is definitely catchy. We've had it up at the counter and everyone's, I need that book. I'm like, well, it's more nuanced. You know, you might want to, but yeah, a lot of people are very excited for this book. So thank you. Thrilled that you all are here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm just a little introduction for anyone who doesn't know. Marina is a Brazilian American journalist who has written about feminism, caregiving, and motherhood across 5 continents. From 2016 through 2020, Marina covered Brazil for the Washington Post. Her reporting took her from remote corners of Brazil's Amazon rainforest to Rio's gang-controlled favelas. Her article on the spread of the Venezuelan diaspora in South America was nominated by the Washington Post for a Pulitzer Prize. Before joining the Post, she was a correspondent for Reuters in Mozambique. Her work's been published in the Times, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the BBC, PBS, Vice, and others. She lives in DC now with her husband and 2 children who are here. So we're going to get started, and then we'll talk for 20, 30 minutes, and then any questions, answers, we would love for you all to hop in. So I wanted Marina to start off with a very easy, seemingly easy question. Summarize this one, but what was the impetus behind your book? Why did you write this?
Well, I've been a foreign correspondent for 10 years, and I've covered everything, like you mentioned, from politics to health stories to sports and the Olympics. And I've loved writing all those stories, loved covering breaking news, but my favorite stories have always been in the cracks between cultures. Seeing what one culture deems to be absurd, another culture thinks is essential. And so that's always been the stories that I've been most drawn to. And it wasn't until I became a parent that I realized how many parenting decisions are culturally influenced. How much where you grow up determines what you think is normal or appropriate or right in raising children. And so when I was in Brazil, I had both of my children there, and I was pregnant with my son. And the night before he was born, I was packing my hospital bag, and my mom, who's here tonight, asked me if, amongst the onesies and the bottles and all the things I was taking, was I bringing gift bags for my guests? And I said, no, Mom, I'm not bringing gift bags for anybody. This is not a party. I am giving birth, and my immediate family is going to be there, but that's it, right? Anyone else is not invited and not welcome. So that's how we're going to do it. And she said, okay, fine, however you want to do it, you decide. And my birth was not a party. I had an emergency C-section. Oliver was rushed to the NICU. It was very scary, and there was no baby for anybody to see, but sure enough, the next day, all these guests arrived. And they were people that I had not seen in years, members of my extended family who showed up ready to celebrate this baby that was nowhere to be seen. And at first it really annoyed me, and I thought, my gosh, who are these people? When are they going home? I'm in no place to entertain. I was exhausted physically, mentally, as I'm sure any of us who've had kids, there's no exhaustion quite like that postpartum exhaustion. But I was also really shaken up by the whole experience. I was feeling very lost to have gone through, a birth that looked so different from what I had imagined in my head. And those guests didn't leave. And eventually, I dropped the charade of, being a happy new mom. And I told them, this is actually really hard. And I'm actually really suffering. And I don't know how to advocate for myself medically. I don't know how to get my son out of the ICU. I don't know how to square this with the gap in what I thought it was going to be. I don't know what this says about me as a mother and my relationship with my son. And, all those anxieties kind of came pouring out. And they held my hand through it, and they told me about what it was like for them. And there was such a process of walking me through that transition into motherhood, of telling me it's okay that this isn't what you imagined. It wasn't like that for me either. And I had to learn how to breastfeed too, and it was really difficult. And my son was also in the NICU, and it was really hard. And so having that community walk me through that really difficult moment made all the difference. And when I went home, they kept coming. So they were there to help me through the postpartum period, to teach me all of this generational wisdom that had accumulated over years, especially the women in my life, the women in my family. And then I watched as my friends had kids in the US, and their experience was really different. They were doing it all alone. And a lot of that postpartum anxiety and depression and distress that they were feeling was very isolating to them. And I couldn't help but compare that experience to the community that had sort of forced itself upon me in Brazil. And it got me thinking, where are the other spots in parenthood where other cultures have figured something out that maybe we as Americans judge as wrong, but that could be helpful to alleviating some of our loneliness as parents? You know, we're all complaining a lot about feeling lonely, wanting that village, and I think a lot of us don't know where to start. And so that was sort of the idea for the book. What can we learn from other parents, from other cultures, that can make parenting here in the US a little bit easier?
Right. That's great. When I started reading your book, I thought, oh, I would have never wanted that. And just within a couple of pages, I thought, oh wow, that's exactly what we need. You know, and I think that's the difference, right? And that's sort of what you were saying with American culture. That's not how it is. And one thing I noticed, you wrote an amazing story about C-section parties in the Washington Post, and you did mention the comments, and people were up in arms, like, how could you, just such a negative, and they were missing the bigger picture of what you were showing. I mean, a lot of it was really over the top. In your story, there was I understand it runs the gamut, but it was so not what American families do. And so tell us a little bit about that piece. I feel like must have been a moment for you once you wrote that piece, like, oh, there's more to this.
Yeah, so as I'm sitting in the hospital and all these guests are coming, you know, some journalist part in the back of my head is like,
always
this is a story.
Yeah.
There's a story here. And so a few months later, after I was back at work, I thought, okay, I want to look into this a little bit more. And what I found out is that my birth party was actually quite small. I had a very sad showing of like 25 people coming to my hospital. Yeah, I didn't want to, so fewer people came. But for a lot of Brazilian women, they get dozens of relatives, friends, coworkers who come not just to see them after birth, but to watch the birth itself, not natural births, but C-sections. So Brazilian hospitals, the most luxurious ones, have a little window where you can watch a C-section surgery. And as soon as the baby is out, the window is like frosted and it defrosts, right? So you can see inside and watch the baby emerge into the world. And so people invite.
I see the face.
Yes, exactly. And this is what I loved about it. And I would say this is true for almost every story in the book. When this happened to me, I had my C-section. My parents were there, not looking directly into the window, I might add, looking a little bit to the side. But I saw that hospitals were really made for this. They were made to welcome other people into the birth experience. And so I wrote an article about it for the Washington Post, where I went to a stranger's C-section party. And it was a catered party with white gloved waiters who decorated the maternity ward. And yeah, 40 people showed up for this party. And they were not, you know, the woman's best friends. They were like coworkers who were coming there to support, you know, the same way you would gather at like the break room for cake. They were gathering in the operating suite to watch the C-section. And when I asked Brazilian women about this, when I interviewed people about this for the article, all of them said, yeah, but why is this a story? Like, of course you can come to my C-section party, but like this happens every day. And I said, that's exactly why it's a story. Because this is completely normal for you. And I suspect Americans would think this is a little bit crazy. And sure enough, we published a story. And like you said, the comment section was horrible. People were saying, these women are so superficial. Why would you make a birth into a party? Like, not everything has to be a party. And how horrible for the mother that she has to entertain while she's giving birth. And it's exactly what you said. They were missing the deeper point of the tradition. So in the book, I go through 10 different traditions, and all of them on the surface are a little bit, they're supposed to make you a little bit squeamish, right? They're supposed to buck some American tradition or norm that we hold dear. And every single one of those traditions, there is a deeper meaning underneath it. And when I speak to the mothers who practice these traditions, all of them say, why would you do it any differently? Of course, I'm going to, in the Chinese example, stay home for 40 days and have my family come to me and have them cook and clean because I just did this incredible thing. I just gave birth. I'm going to need help recovering. Of course, I'm going to let my babies sleep outside like the Danish, and that's the best place for them to sleep, and they sleep longer that way. But it's also a way for me as a mom to get a break from my child and to have that physical, mental separation from my kid where I'm not the only person that they turn to 24/7. So all of these, traditions, if you get down to the meat of it, there is something really important that they say about not having to parent alone. And that's what I really wanted people to take from it. Maybe set aside some of our prejudices and the norms that we've grown up with and see what can we integrate that might, be a little bit different but might help us. Because the one thing that I know we can all agree on is that what the model we have here is not working, right? It's not working. When we get Surgeon General warnings about how stressful motherhood is, we know something has to change. And so if the American model isn't working for you, maybe we can try something that is working for millions of women around the world.
Right. And it all comes back to community, whether that community is family, friends. You wrote about a beautiful moment. Backing up a second, when did it sort of start to occur to you? You were surprised by your mother suggesting you bring gifts, but you also wrote about your baby shower. I mentioned this when we were talking in the back, and it was such a beautiful moment. Can you just explain that? And was this a sort of moment where you realized, oh, it's definitely different here than it is back in the States?
Yeah, I would say the minute I found out I was pregnant, I started noticing these differences. And one of the big differences I noticed in Brazil, I had a baby shower. My family is Brazilian American, so I grew up with some of these traditions, but I moved to the US when I was young, and so a lot of it was new to me. And in this baby shower, the members of my family gathered around my big belly, and they started saying, "Come, Oliver, come." And the idea is, you are welcome here, right? There's going to be a family to catch you when you are out on the other side of this experience that you're having. And of course, the baby can't hear that, but the mother can. And I think psychologically that gives a sense of safety of, you're not coming into a situation where you are alone. There is a village here to help you, right? That is what the message that's being sent to the baby and through the baby to the mother, right? And to the family. We are here for you. We are ready for you. Come on out. It's great out here. And one of the grandmothers that I interview in one of my stories in Brazil, the baby's born, she's at this birth party, just like swirling a glass of wine, and she's telling the baby, this is it, life's a party, welcome to the party, And I loved that. And I thought about just how different that mentality is from what we say to American moms all the time, you just wait, get some sleep now, because in 9 months, you will be exhausted, or like go out now, enjoy your friends while you can, because it's all going to be over soon. So that was a very big difference right away, and I wondered, is that going to continue, right? Will that village actually be there for me after the birth? And they were, so that was a beautiful message of, this isn't just superficial. It's not just something we do at the baby shower and then we forget about it 2 months later. That community is actually still there weeks and weeks on.
Right. And as your whole book says, it's in so many different cultures. And so you also wrote, I keep talking about you instead of the people you reported on, but it's what stands out so much to me, your mother-in-law showing up, and completely different culture, completely different practices, but she did what came from her heart and her culture and her past. And again, do you want to talk about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So this was another tradition that I was lucky enough to experience in our own home. I didn't know I was experiencing it at the time, so that made it even more fun to discover. So my mother-in-law moved in to stay with us about 3 weeks after Oliver was born. I was still recovering, still in the midst of that, and I did not know if it was a good idea. Everything that I had read had said, keep people away, stick to your nuclear family. Even though I had that wonderful experience at the hospital, I was still very wary of letting other people in. And we all know, mother-in-law relationships can be tricky. But my husband said, let's try it out. I'll be there to be a buffer between you and her. Let's see what happens. And my mother-in-law is Chinese American. She moved to the US as an adult, so she still has a lot of those Chinese American traditions. And she came, and to my surprise, she was very quiet and very busy. She stayed busy in the kitchen, and I kept wondering, well, what is she doing, spending 4 hours in the kitchen and going to Brazilian markets trying to buy food in Portuguese, and what's going on there? But she was just always over the stove. And the day after she came, these soups started appearing in my breakfast table. And it was one weirder than the other, like chicken papaya soup and like fish soup with goji berries. These mixes that I thought, were not what I was used to in my dining room table. And they kept coming and they kept coming and they kept coming. And I was like, I am not asking for these soups. I don't know why she's feeding me so much soup. What is going on? Little did I know, and I discovered this only when I was researching the book, that she was practicing a Chinese tradition, a Chinese ritual, where for 40 days, the postpartum mom will be cooked for and cared for and helped, right? And so the mom in China stays home for 40 days and her village comes to her. And part of what they really focus on is the physical recovery from birth. So they do physical therapy on the mother, but they also make these very specific soups that are created for healing. And that's what she was giving me. And so it was just a wonderful way to show the acknowledgement that you have been through something difficult and you need to recover. That is not something that is up for debate in Chinese culture. No matter where you are in the social hierarchy, no matter how much money you have, you as a Chinese woman deserve 40 days of rest and recovery after you give birth. And again, it contrasted so sharply with this American idea of, maybe you get a few weeks off for your maternity leave. If you are lucky, we are the only developed country with no federally guaranteed maternity leave. And then you're back at it, right? Pumping in the break room and trying to recover as you go to work. I have friends who have had, very serious birth complications that have had to be back at work a couple weeks later. And there is this idea in American culture that you're just supposed to pick it up where you left it off and not lose productivity in motherhood. And that contrasted so sharply with what I saw in China. So I went to Shanghai, I spoke to women who trained to be nurses for postpartum moms and learned from them, what do we actually need postpartum? What is the ideal standard of care? And how can we do that for ourselves, right? In American society with no maternity leave, is there a way that we can take some aspects of these traditions and implement it here in the US as things are now while we wait for policy to change and fight for that change? What can we do from the comfort of our own homes?
Right. And in each chapter, each section, you do have the bring it home thing. As I was reading this and sort of what you had been writing about, it is so hard here. And so why is it? What is it about American parenthood that seemed amiss to you as you were reporting this book, or before you started reporting this book? And then is that fixable, and how can we change the way things are?
Yeah, in every tradition, I saw a very strong sense of community, right? A strong idea that parents are not and should not be alone to raise a child. And I think one of the things that I love about life in the US is that it is a culture that really values independence. And that can be a wonderful thing, right? It can be wonderful to come from a family whose values you disagree with and start fresh and create traditions that work for you. It can be wonderful to move to a new city chasing after your own career. But I think when you have kids, you suddenly look around and realize, oh my gosh, I am alone. And that, I think, is the first time that some people really crave that village, that community. When I was writing the book, I saw that so many other countries have more support, whether it's government support, like we see a lot in Europe, right, with a strong welfare state that's going to pick up parents and help them, help cure the gaps, right, in a community, or more traditional cultures where neighbors are a huge part of how we raise our children, and they step in whenever they can to help pick up the slack with childcare, helping kids with homework, etc. And then in some countries like Brazil, like in Singapore, you have family that steps in and helps you raise your children. But nowhere have I seen parenting be as lonely as it is in America, where because of this independence, we are expected to do it all by ourselves. Asking for help from anyone, whether it's the government or friends or neighbors, is considered an imposition and an admission of failure. So that was extremely different. And so many of the countries that I went to, people would say, well, how do you do it in the US? And I would say, oh, actually, we don't have grandparents who pick their kids up from activities every day, or we don't have, 400 days of parental leave, or, we don't have any of these safety nets that you rely on so deeply in other countries. And all of them would look at me with pity in their eyes and say, how do you do it? And the answer is not well. So to answer your question, can it be done in the US? The answer is yes, it can, but it requires a lot of intention. And that's why I decided to end each chapter of the book with takeaways that you can take from these cultures and implement it in your own home. So maybe you don't want to have a C-section party with 40 of your closest friends and coworkers. That's fine. But there is a lot that you can learn from that tradition about opening up your postpartum experience to other people, about developing that village while you are still pregnant so that they can be there for you when you need it. Asking for help. I suggest instead of having a baby shower, have a shower where you as the new mom can ask for help, whether it's a meal train or pre-scheduled coffee dates where people can know that you are open for that and that you need that time off, or someone who can come and help you clean your house or cook meals or whatever you might need. But opening yourself up to that and telling people, listen, I am open to help, I need help. That's one great way to do it. Another section that I absolutely love in the book is the section about neighbors. And I talk about how I went to Mozambique. I learned so much about how neighbors can help parents raise children and not feel so alone. And then we moved to the US and we implemented that here. Now, of course, we are not living in a Mozambican village, but a lot of what I learned from Mozambicans works here as well, right? And we can talk a little bit more about those things. But I found that so many of these traditions, if you don't take them to the letter of the law and you look at the spirit behind them, they are applicable here. And we're hungry for that too. We are hungry for that community. We're hungry for that relationship with family. We need that support.
Yes, that's so true. Now, you mentioned friends. Can we talk about that? There were a lot of the cultures do rely on people who are not family members, like Mozambique and various others. So you ended up relying on friends quite a bit, and you moved across the world to live with friends, and you were considered a little nutty for doing so, right? But can you talk about that and again, how to apply that back to this American culture where you're right, like people here are afraid to ask for help because it's an imposition and there are definitely walls, and it's a struggle.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, we were exhausted like all parents and feeling very isolated, trying to parent 2 little kids on our own in our house, right? And we decided we wanted a built-in sense of community. So to do that, we decided to pick up and move to Singapore, where our best friends lived, and try to live close to them for a few years. And it was fantastic. Everybody thought we were crazy, to the point where they would say, why did you move to Singapore? And we'd be really embarrassed to say, to live close to our best friends. Because everyone, who does that past like middle school? You don't move to a different country to want to be close to your friends. People assumed that we were related. They would ask if we were cousins, and eventually we were just like, yeah, we're family. It was just an easier way to explain what we were doing there. But that move taught me so much about just how fantastic it can be to have those built-in systems of support. So we moved across the street from our best friends and built a life around them. And we created a mini commune where we were raising our children together for all intents and purposes. We were taking them to school together, taking them to after-school activities together. We were doing dinners together, coming over each other's houses. We had keys, so we would just walk in and out. The adults would go out together while the kids had a play date at home and stayed with the babysitter. And it was just, I don't know who was happier with that arrangement, if it was the children or if it was the adults. All of us felt incredibly supported. And there was nothing like coming home to our friend's house after work and, we're all having dinner together and the children are laughing and I can tell that they're having the time of their lives with, their friend who became a brother to them while we were there. Of course, there's so much privilege that comes with this. Not everybody can pick up and move across the world to be close to their friends, and eventually we had to move back too. But I find that being intentional about these relationships can take you such a long way. We moved to Bethesda where we didn't know anyone, and we had to start from scratch and rebuild that community. And so many of our community members are here today, and we had to do that very intentionally. But creating, some of those rituals where, okay, we're going to see each other every Friday. We're going to open up like our family game day to our neighbors. We are going to do dinners together and breakfast together. Those types of ritualistic encounters really helped solidify that sense of community. Another thing that we did that I talk a lot about in the book is I think a lot of people are very scared to ask for help here in the US. And I found that offering help proactively is a great way to say to people, listen, I want that reciprocal relationship. I am here to help you. I know you're having a tough week at work. Let me take the kids for you. Or I know you're sick. Here is some soup, that I Uber Eats sent to your house. And of course, you're saying to people, I'm here for you, but what you're also saying is, I hope you can be there for me too, right? I want that reciprocal relationship, and you're establishing that right off the bat. And I find that it's really hard for people to be immune to that kind of thing. When you offer help proactively, it's very hard for them to then draw those boundaries, and you see the walls slowly come down.
Right.
We've seen that happen here, and I really think that when you make these decisions with intention, it works, right? It's all about not just letting yourself float through your neighborhood and trying to make friends organically. I think we are past that point as a society. We need to do this with intention in order for it to work.
Right. And it's still hard for us Americans. It is. A friend, said to me, I don't want to ask for help. It's too much trouble. And I said, flip it. If I asked for help, what would you do? And she said, I would do it in a second. I would be happy to do it. And so it's hard for us to change that mindset.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and that's something I still have to remind myself too. And now every time I ask for help, I don't see it as an imposition. I see it as me saying, I'm being vulnerable with you and I want to be closer, right? It's a great shortcut to getting closer to people. Of course, it has to be balanced, right? You don't want to always be asking for help and never offering anything in return. But that's how I see it now, is me saying, hey, I'm being real with you and I could use your help, and I'm opening the door for that relationship to grow, Right.
And other cultures have been doing this for generations and generations, and yeah, it's just different here.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe one more question and then we'll open it up, but can you just talk about the title? Why that title specifically, and what do you mean by it?
Yes. This title, I was so scared people were going to take it the wrong way. It is not a book about discipline, right? But the reason I had that as the title is because it is something that I heard so often around the world, right? I heard it in Mozambique. I would see people yelling at each other's kids. In Mozambique, they have a tradition where you have one mom that kind of takes care of a street full of children while they play outside, and the parents go to work. And the only way that mom can manage it is because the kids all respect her, right? And her word kind of goes. And I saw it in Singapore, where you have old aunties kind of come at your kids and correct them right away if they're doing something wrong. And in that, again, it's one of these ideas where in the US, I've seen that be very faux pas, where you do not yell at someone else's children because you don't know what kind of parenting style the parent is going for, right? You don't want to send the wrong message. You don't want the parent to feel judged. There's all these considerations. But ultimately what that does is it makes the parent be completely alone to raise that child. Raising a kid in the US is a solo project, and it shouldn't be. When someone else yells at your kids, they are showing not just, that your child's behavior is inappropriate or whatever, but that they love that child, that they want to see that child be a better member of society. They want to help you raise that child to be in a community. And so I really wanted that to come through, this idea of please yell at my children, please be a part of my community, please help me do this project called raising a child. I don't want to do it by myself. You are welcome in to the fold of parenting. I want your help and I need it too, right?
Right. Well, great. It's such a great book, and I'm so excited for it to be out in the world. So why don't we go ahead, and if there are any questions? Any questions, comments? What do we say at school? Questions, comments, observations? No?
I think I have one.
Your mother has one.
What was the most difficult experience that you face in each country that you say, no, this I wouldn't do? And did you find something that you look at as a barrier, like this is too much for me, for my culture? Did you find something difficult when you were doing this?
Yeah, every country had a point where I would get to where I would say, okay, this is too much for me. Every country, including Brazil, right, with the birth parties. I would not invite 40 people to watch my C-section. But every country had that. In Malaysia, I went to explore communal living situations, and I stayed with the tribe deep in the Malaysian jungle, and they're hunter-gatherers that live together with up to 40 families sharing one long house, which is basically like these small apartments within a larger unit, and they share everything together. And that was wonderful the first night. It was very challenging the second night. By the third night, I was ready to go home and have my own space. And so you do see sort of the limits of that. But with every culture, there was, again, that nugget of wisdom that I could bring home. The only culture where I felt like this is a very tricky translation was Finland. Because in Finland, they have so much government support. At the end of every chapter, I have a bring it home section, and where I sort of say, how can you implement, you know, what you have learned in this country here in the US? The Finnish section was all about welfare benefits. And women in Finland, they get paid to be pregnant. They have payments that they receive while they are pregnant, after they are pregnant. They have sick leave. They have all different kinds of benefits. So I would ask these Finnish women, well, what would you do if you didn't have your, you know, pregnancy payment? And they would say, well, then I would use my postpartum payment. And say, okay, well, what if you didn't have, you know, 400 days of maternity leave? What would you do? And they were like, well, I would use my 100 sick days. And eventually it got to the point where I said, okay, well, what if you didn't have any of that? And they said, well, then I would never have children. And I think that's really interesting, especially given the policy debates that we are having right now. What does it take for people to have children? As a society, we think a lot of parenting as a solo project, but really it isn't, right? Parenting is also a public service. We are also raising the next generation of taxpayers, of employees, right? Of teachers, of nurses, people who are going to take care of the next generation and decide the future of the country. And so when you think about parenting as this sort of solo thing that you are doing for yourself, for your family, it can be very easy to say, okay, well, you know, no one needs to support me and I don't need to support anyone else in this hobby of theirs, right? But of course, parenting is so much more than that. Societies that understand that provide the adequate resources for parents to be able to do it well. And if you don't have that, and you also don't have family, and you also don't have community, it can become very, very hard. So my takeaway from the Finland chapter was move to Finland, because there really is very little that we can do until we fight for those policies to change. Yeah.
I have a question. I kind of have two questions. That's okay. I know you were exhibited in The Guardian, so I'm wondering if you were getting an international response and how other people from other countries were relating to you. And then my second question is, I'm just so struck by your advocacy on this point, and do you ever see yourself taking it further in, you know, advocating for change at some kind of national level or becoming a politician or anything?
Thank you for that question. I think, you know, I am very passionate about this. I was speaking to an activist who works to change policy, and she said the reason why parental policy doesn't change is because parents are all exhausted. They are so exhausted doing what they are doing that it is really hard for them to fight for collective change. And by the time you're not exhausted anymore, your kids have grown and that change doesn't affect you as much, right? But it does affect the next generation. So I think it's fantastic to see some of these points being debated finally. And I really think we should not be ashamed to admit that we need more support than what we're getting. That does not make us weak, it makes us human. And I think, again, thinking about reframing parenting as a public service that we are doing and doing it together, right, as a community can make it a lot easier for us to fight for these policy changes. In terms of the article in The Guardian, yes, it has been so interesting because I originally wrote this book very much with an American audience in mind, and the book is about how lonely it is to be a parent in the US. What I have found that I think is really interesting is that people in other countries are now messaging me and saying, wait, but being a parent is actually really hard in the UK as well. It's also really hard in Spain, and like, it's great that we have these welfare benefits, but we don't have the community. We've lost the village. Or like people in Colombia saying we have family, but we don't have the policy, you know? And so I think it's really fantastic that every country is kind of thinking about what they're missing and how they can fight to bring more support to whatever parenting situation they face. But that did surprise me because, you know, part of me is like, well, you in Spain have these wonderful welfare benefits that we don't have in the US.
We would love to have.
Yeah, we would love to have here, but every country does feel that gap. And I think that's because parenting is really hard no matter where you do it. It just shouldn't be a hard thing that you do on your own, right? We can all do hard things, but it's much easier when we do them together.
Right. Making sure she had room to get back there. Excellent. Anyone else? Anything else you want to add? How has the transition back been? I know you said you're building it back up, but that might have been a shock to the system.
Transitioning back was kind of amazing because, you know, I had just done all this research And then it was sort of like the real test. Can we actually create a village in the US? Is this actually possible? And are all these things that I'm saying in my book, you know, doable for the average family? And it has been so wonderful to put it all into practice. And at first it was really hard. Like I talk about at the end of my book, moving back and feeling so alone in a new neighborhood where we didn't know anyone, and thinking, how in the world are we going to meet people? How are we going to create that sense of community that was so strong for us in Singapore? And did we make a massive mistake by, you know, leaving that behind? And little by little, watching that community kind of fuse itself together has been wonderful. And what surprised me the most, I think, is seeing how hungry other parents are for this too. I kind of thought I was going to come in and be like, I have a radical idea to build community. Everybody was like, yes, we absolutely need this. People don't know how to do it, right? But I think there is no question as to like how lonely parenting is here and how much we want to be able to build that community little by little. So watching like some of our neighbors walk down the street, knock on the door unannounced, and come into our house, which is something that we were doing and getting very weird looks in the beginning, right? And we fought through it, and like you feel the culture changing little by little, and that makes me so happy to see that we are able to give that to our kids. We are able to create a neighborhood community where everybody feels welcome at our house and knows that those are the type of people that we are. We want to have that open door policy.
Right. I love that. I love that feeling. You're watching out for each other's children and each other in general, and building a good life.
Yes.
Well, good. Unless there are any other questions, I think we can wrap that up. And if you're up for it, we'll sign some books.
Yes, I'd love to.
And thank you all for coming. It was a
Thank
great
you.
conversation.